Our speaker grew up in Kingsport. She went to Livingston College for her undergraduate work, and she tells me she did her graduate work on many campuses, including the University of Chicago. She and her husband, Mac, had 7 children, all alive and well, and 2 of them got her here today. Now, they said, please excuse them, they've heard the speech. Daughter Donella is retired from the English department at Dobbins Bennett. Our speaker has been active in community, and I treasure the time that she was on the board of the Girls Club. She was a tremendous asset to us, understanding young people as she does. She has been very active in her church, which is Bethel AME Zion. She now speaks about her experiences of growing up in Kingsport, and if you have not heard her speak, there were some unusual experiences. She's been a role model for me since she joined the Girls Club board, and I got to know her really well. Now, I have always called her Mrs., but recently we compared ages, so I now call her by her first name.
Good, thank you.
She's only 24. That's right.
Going on, yes.
But my name is Barbara Bailey.
Okay.
And she is...
Jill Ellis.
Well, it is so wonderful to present to you Jill Ellis.
Thank you. I hadn't even planned to say this in introduction, but this is something I feel that only people from Appalachia have that type of karma. You know, how many people are from Southwest Virginia, Tennessee, or maybe a little bit of North Carolina? How many? All right. For the men, you're strong, your word is your bond, and you won't pay for a good day's work. An equal pay for a good day's work. And women, and you like to tell jokes, and you like to laugh. And if a person is your friend, he's a friend for life, and you shake on that. That's something peculiar about people of Appalachia. We trust, we bond, we appreciate people. And somehow or another we have that feeling, well, you know, I'm as good as the next person. You know, you have that feeling if you're in a certain place and you look around, and then you get that feeling, well, you know, I feel like I'm in a good place. They might be high and falutin, you know, that's a main word that we say, high and falutin, but there is something that keeps us in a good bond because we believe in people. And we are religious. We are religious. One time we used to ride up and down the hillside around here, taking the children out for a little ride, and they played a game. How many churches could they find on? I got a church over here on this side of my window. I've got a church over here on my side on this window. And when we got to our destination, whoever was on this side said, I won because I found more churches, counted more churches on my side than your side. But that's another common bond that we have for those of us who are from Appalachia. And then we believe in family. We believe in family. I know when I was pregnant with my 5th child, I went to see my grandma, and she lives in Hawkins County. She lived in Hawkins County. Down in Surgoinsville, people who are not familiar with us, they say Surgeonsville, but in Surgoinsville, and she said, "Honey, you pregnant again?" "Yes, Grandma." I said, "Well, I can't have, I don't know why, Grandma." "Oh, yeah, I know why. But you ain't no better than I am. I had 9. And see, there's that attitude that we have about Appalachia. You're no better than I am because, I did the same thing, or I have the same thing, or we're on equal terms until somebody breaks that trust. And then if they break that trust, then our memory is long. And the family includes the mama and the daddy, 6 or 7 children, your mama and your daddy, and your husband's mama and daddy. And then the cousin will come by to visit and hang around a little while. And the family, you were just all in the same house, and family went more than what our genes indicated that we were from. We had a bonding. And I'm just saying all of this to tell you that Kingsport is of Appalachia. And I want to talk about the romance. I just love it. I love to talk about it. And I love to read, see, look, hear, listen, and shake a hand about what a beautiful, lovely, special, Pacific, unusual, mystic little town that has grown now past 50,000 people. This area was discovered by Dr. Walker, who was a scientist and explorer. And he was something like Daniel Boone. The two of them came within the same century, back in the 1700s. And Dr. Walker was exploring this area between, well, at that time we weren't designated as Tennessee or Virginia or North Carolina. It was just all a land up there, and nobody had any Pacific boundaries that we could say specifically North Carolina or Tennessee. We stayed at state of Franklin for a quick second, and we didn't know where we belonged, But anyway, Dr. Walker was exploring this area down here. It was just lush, nothing but trees and mountains and rivers and streams and wild animals. And he was down near Holston River, down near where Rotherwood, when you go over the Rotherwood Bridge, where Rotherwood House Mansion is right on the left side going down 11W. He stopped by the stream, and that was nobody had given it a name at all, but it was the North Fork of the Holston River. So he stopped there to rest, and he saw this enormous tree. It was something, it looked like it came out of another world. And he wrote in his notebook about this tree. He measured it. He just looked at the top of it to see how far would he have to look up to see where the branches stopped at the top. So at that time, in his notebook, he wrote it was 25 feet around the trunk. 25 feet. And then when he looked up, he could not stop to measure the height. So he estimated the height of this tree. And it was an elm tree. He did know by the leaf that it was an elm tree. And he said as far as he could bend his head back and look up, he estimated the height of that tree. And I brought some pictures, and hopefully I won't talk too long. Barbara, Jack, y'all raise your hand and tell me, hold it. I want you to look at these pictures. And I have a picture of the elm tree. I remember the elm tree. I'm 75 years. And when I lived at Rotherwood, my dad would take me down to the old elm tree, and we would sit there and look and talk. And he used to he was one of the camp, I don't know what he was, but he had the Boy Scouts here in Kingsport every Saturday down at North Fork of the Holston River, teaching them little things, telling them about the trees and everything. So he would take me there. And part of Fred Ross, well, he had a silk mill, then he had a cotton mill. But I'm going back to the 1700s and the early 1800s, the formation and beginning of Kingsport. Part of that little factory that he had was still standing when I was a little girl. It was strongly built, and I can remember that somebody had tried to doctor the elm tree, and it looked like a turtle's back, tortoise. And the tree surgeon had cut out part of that tree that was diseased and put that plate in that tree so it would live a little longer. And I used to love to go up to it and just rub my hand over it because it felt so hot, so good and slick and cool around that little space. And then there was water trickling out. He had a turbine there to pull that wheel, and that was still standing when I was 6 or 7 years old. All of that was still standing. And Fred Ross came to this area about 1832. And it's written in his notebooks. Everybody wrote something then. When something came around or did something, they had a little notebook. They would take notes. And for some way or some reason, and I'm so glad that Kingsport has a historical society. You know, somewhere, if we're not on the second world, we'll all be up on the new space station, I guess, when we tear up this world. But anyway, there'll be something left here in writing. It'll be something left here to say that Kingsport did exist, because nature and man has a way of keeping things together. And now we have a road map. We have a way now to keep it going. Fred Ross was 21 years old. He was from the Commonwealth of Virginia. Oh, his dad was rich, and he had come down this way. He had heard that there was a man who was an explorer, and he liked to walk and discover things, and his name was Daniel Boone. They didn't call him Daniel Boone. And he had discovered all this virgin territory down here. He didn't come down here to look at it. He sent somebody else through his bank to purchase all of this virgin territory. Said it had rivers running through, trees hanging out, wild animals. Oh, it was just gorgeous. So Fred Ross's daddy died. He didn't know that his dad had left him all of this part of, it wasn't Tennessee, but all of this land down here. So he said, well, I'll claim it. I'll go down there. The other son got the land that was there in Virginia. So Fred got his share of his inheritance. And he loaded up, And the thing that was so unusual, this is what we have heard about Fred. His dad owned, just acres of land, cattle, slaves, everything. He had it all. Young Fred told his brother that I'm taking carriages and food, and I'm not going to take all of the slaves. Those slaves who are older and they probably can't make the travel, they can't make the tour, I'm going to set them free. And his brother agreed. And the young folk, almost his age or a little younger, he packed them up in one of his carriages, and they came down to Tennessee, what is now Tennessee and Virginia. And in his notes, coming from up in Fairfax, Virginia, that was a Commonwealth anyway, wasn't anything named that much. He came through that old Bristol Highway. Do y'all remember where the old Bristol Highway was? Chestnut Ridge. The story goes that when he got up to Chestnut Ridge, he stopped and looked over and saw all of this beautiful land, the Blue Mountains, all of this land down the Blue Mountains circle. It was a basin, like a bowl. And the colors, he could see all of the colors from the blues to the reds to the greens. Then he saw this stream running through. And in his notes, he wrote something to the effect that I thought I had gone to paradise. He had never seen anything as beautiful as sitting up on Chestnut Ridge and looking down into this valley. So, you know, when we had that movie out 40 years ago, How Green Is My Valley, when I read this and about what he had in his notes, that was the first thing I thought about. Ooh, how green is my valley. Well, he was encouraged. He was excited. And all this new land, this is mine. And he found a place to settle right on one of those rivers that he saw running, meandering down in the valley. And that was Holston River on the North Fork side. Close to that elm tree that he read about, that Dr. Walker had put in his notes. Dr. Walker was so excited, he sent it to the forestry museum or something in Washington, D.C. And that tree is listed in the annals in Washington, D.C. in the Department of whatever it is, forestry or whatever that department is. You know, we're down in Washington, D.C., you know, as something that's perpetuated in time. He wanted to build a castle overlooking that North Fork River. He loved Ivanhoe. Y'all remember reading in British literature, Ivanhoe. It was a little love story, you know, in literature. And his favorite story was Ivanhoe. And the beautiful young maiden that lived in the castle there she fell in love with some guy or whoever it was. It was a beautiful love, romantic story, Ivanhoe. But the name of the castle where this beautiful girl lived was Rotherwood. And that name just stayed with him, you know, all that length of time. Well, he's 21 or 22 by now. And he said, I'm going to build me or Rotherwood in this paradise. And he got all the people and artisans and everybody to help him build this castle. Now, there are excerpts, the strongest old writings that we have of Sullivan County are at King College. Anybody familiar with the library at King College? Oh, if you get in there, don't go in there if you have trouble with asthma or it's dusty. Well, last time I was there researching, it's full of dust. But the whole process of building this mansion that nobody in Upper East Tennessee, which was not the name, had ever seen. Because he had moved into an era that it wasn't anything but Indians, some people who were lost when they came over from England or Portugal or wherever, in the Dutch, when they came in 1610, 11, they ran away and they found a hiding place here in the mountains. And people wanted to call them savages. Everything was a savage if it wasn't like you. So there was Indians and whatever else was running around. And he used them. They made the brick, they carried the brick, they built it on the hill. It was 3 stories. It had a winding road all the way to the top. And on the top story, he put a swimming pool. He had water on top of that top. And there are still, in that library, there was a sketch of how that Rotherwood looked. And people from all around came around to see this miracle. What in the world is this? And the road was winding. It went up and up into this beautiful house. He wasn't married. He said, now I have all this beautiful place here. Well, who's going to help me enjoy it? And he came from Virginia, rich, parties, soirees, everything that was great, and horses and everything. So he set out and let people know. There were a few settlers here at that time who were of good accord. They had money, not as much as he did. So they set out looking for a pretty young lass for Fred A. Ross. Well, they found her. She's from Jonesboro, and she came from a kind of well-to-do family. And the papers say that, she was the most beautiful girl that they had around here. She was eligible, and all the young men were just searching and, trying to impress her. Well, once she had a look at Fred when he came a-courting, her name was Thessalonia Vance, Thessalonia, Vance. They got married, and they had lots of children. Brother Fred was a young man who had vision. He pictured all of these things that would improve him or that was adventurous. He said, I think I'd like to have a business making silk, because he was accustomed to silk. I've got the money, why can't I make silk? It's an Oriental thing, but why can't we make it here? I've got all the natural resources. So he's got mulberry trees from China, had them shipped over and had them growing, and had the little worms in there, and he tried a silk mill. And part of that building, that was the first little building, was when he was trying to process that silk and to manufacture it and send it off. Well, the mulberry trees didn't make it, and the worms died. So But you know, this is serendipity. I don't know what it is. Do you know I have a mulberry tree in my yard? And, you know, I didn't know what it was. So we took a berry off to see, what is this? You know, the birds were just flocking, you know. And we took it out to the nursery at the Evergreen, and they said, this is a mulberry. This is a mulberry fruit. And I said, how in the world did I get a mulberry tree in my yard, in town, and we were only supposed to have walnuts? Because when Miss Lola came here, Miss Lola Dennis came here, she named every street from the church circle radiating out either a flower or a tree. You know, we were Walnut, we were Cedar Street, Myrtle Street. Just think about all the streets you know in Kingsport from the church circle that have names of flowers, trees, and well, that's another story. I got off beam there. But anyway, I just wanted to say I have a mulberry tree in my yard. I don't know if anybody else has one or not. But I said, how did it get here? Did it come magically? Or is that still my connection to Rotherwood? You know, it's creepy just thinking about I have a fruit-bearing mulberry tree in my yard. Plus the only 2 walnut trees that are left on Old Walnut Street, which is now East Sevier. But anyway, back to Fred A. Ross. All right, when the Revolutionary War came, all right, the British came down through there, and they got on that river. They love to fight up here in this area. Elizabethton still has a celebration up there. Sycamore shows where that skirmish between the British and the settlers. Yeah, you know, that's a little national place that you go to celebrate, you know, the Revolutionary War, what the settlers did there to keep it, to save themselves. But anyway, they set fire to Fred Ross's Rotherwood, the one that faced the North Fork, the Holston River. So the first Rotherwood burned. And all of the beauty of that dream house. But that did not daunt his spirit. He started a cotton mill, and then across the road, that is now old 11W, there was another house. And it was the second Rotherwood. And he put 2 parallel buildings together. And I'm going to hopefully give you a feeling of how it was in that building, in that house, where 2 parallel houses were fused together to make the one house of Rotherwood Mansion. But anyway, let me go back to Fred Ross. He still worked diligently, and he suffered the loss, and he became a minister. And he was the first minister at the old First Presbyterian Church and old Kingsport. If you've never been to that church, have any of you visited that church or gone down there to look at it? It was, at that time, people were smaller anyway, you know. They were 5'10" or 90 pounds, you know. So the church, when you go in there, it looks small, you know, when you go in there. But in that church, when Reverend Dr. Fred Ross was the minister there. Along the wall, on the left side wall of that church, there were like a slab into the wall. And there were two of them. Coming from the ceiling, they came out this way. And there were three of them. And he made a place for the slaves that he had to come to his church. And that was unusual in this area. Well, everybody was poor, just only a few people. There are some names that if I call them, you'll remember them, who did have money, and the money is still within the area. But that was unusual. He thought maybe that, well, I don't know what he thought. He was just brave enough to have his slaves come to worship in his church with the other people who wanted to worship. Now, I'm still in the 1800s, folk, you know, so that was an unusual factor. But in the meantime, let me tell you about how Kingsport made its money. Kingsport at first was Christiansville. Then everybody was so excited about Fred Ross and his money and how he made it and how young he was and what he did. They dropped Christiansville, and it was Rossville. So Kingsport was named Rossville. And then after Rossville, it was called Flat Boatyard, because we were so fortunate to have this river that ran from way up in Virginia and came through Tennessee, picked up Tennessee River to Nashville, and the river went all the way out to Memphis, and we were connected to the world. You know, that's the way we are here. This is such a unique setting that we take for granted and don't realize that we had such a river that transported. And the main transport business was hauling merchandise, but mostly salt from the salt mines up in Saltville. Did you read in the paper or hear about them finding another tooth or foot or of a mammoth up in Saltville? All right, well, you know, people made money hauling salt out of Saltville down the river, and they were on flatboats. And well, the flatboats didn't cost much. They just put the salt barrels on the side of the riverbank, and when the river would rise up, the salt barrels would float on down the river, and then they would have them and put them on a flatboat, and somebody would bring them down to this part right here. And this was Mr. King was another man who went. He had money up in Saltville, Virginia. So by that time, when it got down here, the Netherland family was one family that did have a lot of influence and a lot of money here in this area. And of course, that's where Netherland Inn comes in. One thing about Netherland Inn, it was the first time in the English language that the word B-A-R, bar, got into our vocabulary. When the people would get off of those boats at the port there at Netherland Inn, they would go in and sit down and rest, and they would have a drink. You know, we always had our brew stuff, you know. We were noted for our good juice that we made from the corn and everything. And they kept coming in, and they would go up to get it off the shelf when you walk in the door. If you've been down to Netherland Inn, you know, there's a little foyer right there in the front. Well, the man at that time who was at the front door to greet the visitors said he couldn't have those people walking in there and going up and getting on the walls and taking down their wine and stuff. So he put a wooden bar, a wood, flat, across where they were going into that. He made another room right there in that front room. And he said, I'm going to put a bar here so they can't get back here. That's where bar came. That's where that word came from. Out of Tennessee, down at Netherland Inn, back in, I guess I'm still in the 1980s. I mean 1980s, 1800s. That's where the bar. So he put something there to keep about like this, because if you visit Netherland Inn now, I believe that bar is still there in its own hinges. They just lift it up and go back there. To keep the flatboat men from coming in there, taking their liquor and their wine and stuff off of the shelf, so he had to put a barrier there. So the word bar was invented. So remember where it came from next time you think about having a bar. I have just gone on.
I have a question.
Yes.
Teacher. We have a time limitation, so would you share
Yes.
with us how you got to live at Rotherwood?
Okay.
And something
Yeah,
about
because I
Mrs.
could
Dennis?
go, all right. I could go on and on. When Mr. Dennis was the person who made certain that all the finances that this dream city needed, that he provided it. He was the financier of getting money in Kingsport. He had heard about this area because it was very rich in all kinds of water, everything. And he set up the legislature and the finance department for the state of Tennessee, because he worked for Blair and Company in New York City. So he heard about this section up here. And he knew Mr. Carter, who was a man in Virginia, Commonwealth, and they had the same dream. Now, Mr. J. Fred Johnson had married Mr. Carter's daughter. So somehow or another, those men got together, and they said, let's have a planned city where we can make money with this industrial revolution. Mr. Dennis furnished the money. He had a friend who was a planner. He laid out a plan for a perfect city, a perfect plan. He had the money. We had a river. So they formed a coalition. Mr. Dennis, Mr. J. Fred Johnson managed to make certain, I don't know if he rented it or how, but anyway, Rotherwood came within the, like they called it, the Avoca Company. They formed a little company so they could get things done. And Rotherwood, we didn't have a country club or anything like that. So Rotherwood was this big mansion that Joshua Phipps had left, and those men got together, bought the house, Rotherwood, and that was like the country club, formed a company called Avoca, got the railroad, a planner from somewhere up in Massachusetts. He laid out a perfect plan for a perfect city. and taking everything that was important to people, religion, family, recreation, money, and everything. So they made it, he put it on paper and then made little houses, and this was the plan for Kingsport. So they went around to get it. Mr. Dennis found the coal field over there, Westmoreland or whichever it was. Now, coal was king. My mother and daddy, my mother was from Big Stone or Stonega, Virginia. And she worked in a coal mine. My daddy was from Hawkins County. So I'm full of Appalachia. And living in a camp too, you know, and then living at a farm, and then living at a mansion. Gosh, I hadn't thought about that. I got the best of all of the worlds, from outside toilets to sleeping on 3 sheets. Anyway, Mr. Dennis furnished the money. He bought the coal mine. He got the coal mine, Westmoreland. They courted Mr. Eastman, because he was the biggest thing in the world, in the United States, making fast money with a new contraption, the Kodak camera. So they courted him, and I got pictures of Mr. Eastman or something over there. Y'all can look through it. And they sold the bill of sales to George Eastman. He said, okay, I will come. This is a rich place. I'll come. I'll build my plant. So when they got him here, and then Mr. Carter liked railroads, Mr. Dennis loved railroads, they said, we got to get the goods out. We can't ship it down the river because we never know when the river's going to go down, and we'll be stranded out in the river. So we got a railroad. Mr. Nolan came in, and then people started coming here to work. This was a place that you could actually use your talents and work. So Mr. Nolan had the wheel, that's church circle, and radiating out from the center of town with the business, and the homes circulates from the churches. I mean, there was a whole concept attitude for family, to churches and family and work and recreation. That was the theme. So that's how Kingsport was built. Discipline defines your destination. And Kingsport was really defined because it was planned. You know, discipline defines your destination. And we're still growing. Mama and Daddy were chosen by Westmoreland Coal Company to come to Kingsport to work at this big mansion, Rotherwood. I wasn't born. And my dad was the chauffeur. He was the butler. And sometimes I have pictures over there of him on the horses. So he was everything. Mama was the chief chef. Mr. Dennis's main home was in Oyster Bay, New York. So anything that Mr. Dennis liked and wanted to eat, Inez, just call Oyster Bay and get the recipe for lobster Newburg or whatever, you know, whatever. Or he loved black bean soup, all of that little stuff that he liked. My mother became the biggest chef in Kingsport. She knew all these fancy dishes and everything. So that's how they got to Rotherwood. They were selected out of the coal mine that Mr. Dennis was owning, and they came to take care of Rotherwood and the people who came. My dad had a great presence. He was 6 feet 1 inch, 300 pounds, and he had that dignity. Anyway, I was born in 28. They had been here 5 years. I was born at Marsh Clinic, and Marsh Clinic was right across, it was on Holston Street, right across from First Baptist Church. 4-story building. And they rushed Mama to the hospital to have the baby, to the clinic. They said, I'm sorry, we don't take colored people. So Mr. J. Fred said, well, you got to take Inez because she's fixing to have this baby. They said, but we don't have any place for her. So I don't know what the rest of the conversation. Anyway, they whisked Mama down in the furnace room. So I was born in the furnace room. And they whisked me out right quick and Mama out. So I don't know where Mama recuperated, but my aunt took me to her house, you know, because I didn't have any place to incubate and Mama wasn't there. So that's how I got to Rotherwood. And I felt like I was Queen Bee. My best friend was Alan Lefevre. My second best friend, Mr. George Lefevre, owned the dairy farm. Oh, gosh, folks, Kingsport is so full of stuff, I can't keep talking. I can't keep talking. But anyway, Mr. Lefevre was the manager of the dairy farm. And I can't tell you about, all those cows and First Electric milkers and how we furnished milk, and how my daddy would take sperm from our prize bulls to Greenville, and I'd ride in the car with my dad with the sperm in the middle of the sea. We ride to Greenville because Greenville had a lot of cows, you know, and it's everything. But anyway, that's how I got to Rotherwood. It was a dream place. I talk with God. I talk with God. My best friend was Mr. Lonnie. He was the gardener. He had patience. He knew every flower. Mrs. Dennis was a horticulturist. He had patience with me because I had nobody to play with. I had a dog, I had a cat, I had an old Mary pony, but Mr. Lonnie had patience with me. Mama would ask me when I'd come in at the end of the day, where you been? What you been doing? So one day I said, I talked to God today. So she kept on. And finally she kept asking again, well, what all did you do today? I said, well, I talked to God again today. She said, honey, did God talk back to you? I said, yes. Oh, Lord. Mama always wore little high-heel shoes. And, of course, she had her uniform. But she went flying out of that kitchen and went up to the garden in her little high-heel shoes and asked Mr. Lonnie, I don't forgotten exactly what it was. But anyway, she questioned him thoroughly with a lot of vim and vigor. He said, yeah, she talks to God every day. And somehow or another, Mama found out, Mr. Lonnie explained to Mother, that we would stand on the knoll behind the big garden, the English garden, and talk back to the house, and our voices echoed back. And I would say, hello, hello, I love you, I love you. And I felt like God was talking back to me because there wasn't anybody else. That's how I got to Rotherwood.
Would you tell us also how Mrs. Dennis got to Rotherwood?
Oh, that's a love story. I tell you, Kingsport just loved everything Mr. Nolan planted to make it a beautiful city, a picture place, ideal, perfect. All the trees and the flowers died. Well, they said, you know, maybe we need a horticulturist here, you know. We need an engineer because the other man was just an architect, you know. He didn't know anything about plants and flowers. So they hired L.A. Anderson. And fine, she had graduated from Columbia University, and had studied somewhere in the South, one of the big colleges. So L.A. Anderson went to the improvement company and introduced herself and came in. She came in. I know Mama said that Daddy, well, he's a chauffeur. He had to go to Bristol at the train station to pick her up and bring her back. And when she got there, they were not expecting a woman engineer. L.A. Anderson was a female, unmarried. And, of course, at that time, men said, we can't have any woman telling us what to do here. Anyway, they hired her. She revamped it, and she was the one who named every street and put in floral and other stuff that were compatible to this region. That's the reason why we still have myrtle trees in Kingsport, that we have walnut trees and everything. So she was the one who came in and even planted climbing rose bushes on the Kingsport Library. Had a little roses. Anybody remember that? If you go downtown, I tell you, yes, ma'am. She had roses on the side. You know, we had that little park in the middle and had climbing roses on that.
Now, did you want to be anything like Mrs. Dennis?
Did I do what?
Want to be like Mrs. Dennis?
I did. Yes. She was a gracious lady. She had the prettiest hats. Oh, my Lord. And they're coming back in style. You know, kind of hats made out of organza that is stiff, and you can see through them, and wide brim, and she was very elegant with her hats and everything. But she had one hip that seemingly was higher than the other. And whenever she would walk, it seemed like that hip was always up a little bit. When I went to the University of Chicago, we had to all stand in line to get examined. You know, that's where we took our medical. We had all these little brown paper bag dresses. And I went in like this. And the examiner said, you must be from down south, something like that. And I said, yes, sir. He said, you got lordosis. I said, what? Everybody comes from down south, they got lordosis. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, you got a crick, I think that's what he called it, a crick in your spinal cord, and it's going upside like that. And when he told me that, I straightened up real good. But I wanted, from Tennessee, but I wanted to look like, I wanted a big hat, I wanted to look like her. Now, she's white with blonde hair, beautiful clothes, and thin. And I wanted to look like Miss Dennis. Yes, and she died poor.
Don't end on that.
No.
But nice and beautiful.
She was here when they dedicated the John B. Dennis, what do you call it? Expressway highway. She was here then. And her dear friend, Mr. Arthur Wells. Does anybody remember Arthur Wells? Arthur Wells. You know, he was over the Kingsport nursery. He grew everything that was planted in Kingsport. And he was a good friend. He would always pat me on the head when we'd go to the nursery. Thank you all for dealing with me.
Well, thank you for coming.
Here's my speech.
I'm delighted that we have tape today, but this is too good not to carry for posterity. So Jill and I are going to get together, and I'm going to
I don't believe it. You're going to do that, Betty.
I am. I'm going to get there soon. And once I get it on tape, I think we can get a manuscript.
Good. I can't think of a better way to have the first official meeting of the Kingsport Historical Society than having you, Jill. And thank you for reminding us who we are and what a blessing it is to live here.
It is. It really is. It's a blessing to be here. And I didn't get a chance to say anything about one of the richest people here in this room with land and attitude is Jack Pierce.
There he is, yeah. Mm-hmm.
When he tells his story, and if he doesn't tell it, I'm going to write it with Betty.
Well, we've got Mr. Dobbins, J.W. Dobbins' great-grandson back there, too. Yeah.
Well, how about that? Oh, Hal Dobbins and...
About the mulberries.
Huh?
You were talking about the mulberries.
Yes.
Bill, like we can remember my grandmother or so, they made mulberry wine.
Oh, yes. Oh, Nick Showalter. Anybody remember Uncle Nick? You remember Uncle Nick? George Lefevre, yes. Well, I know you all are limited. Anybody who wants to come by and finish talking, I'm sitting
Well, we may have to have you back. I got an idea you didn't finish a lot of stuff this morning.
Well, here's my speech here.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.